watch. It's 1 minute past, so we will start. So thank you very much to everyone for joining us today. We have an absolutely fantastic lineup for you, and we're here to discuss the topic of preparing for partnership. And everyone that you will hear from today has contributed to this fabulous book. And a massive thank you to Globe Law and Business, who have got us all here today. And the editor, Alex, is online, and she is going to be monitoring the chat for us today. So thank you very much, Alex. So you are going to hear from a number of us today. You are going to hear from Michael Roster, who is the former Los Angeles managing partner of Morrison Foerster. You are going to hear from Jennifer Bluestein, who is Chief Talent and HR Officer at Perkins Cole. And Jennifer is also co-chairing with me today. So thank you very much, Jennifer. Tom Bird, who is an author, trainer and keynote speaker. Thanks. Hi, Tom. He's also joining us today. And last but not least, Nikki Owen, who is a partner in the professional practices team at Crow in the UK, joins us. We have some slight problems with her video, but fortunately the audio is working, so she will be joining us later. I'm Claire Rason. I am the director of Client Talk, and I am going to be co-chairing with Jennifer. So a few housekeeping points before we jump in. It is going to be very conversational today. We don't have any slides. Some people will be pleased to hear. And we have a lot to cover and an hour to try and do that all in. So we're going to try and be good with our timekeeping. We would invite you, if you do have any questions, please do pop those in the chat as we go through. Alex is going to be monitoring the chat and will be putting the questions to the panel at the end of the conversational part of the session today. Please keep cameras and microphones off if you are not a panelist. And we very much hope that you enjoy the next hour with us. So without further ado, I want to introduce Michael. And Michael, I mentioned you were the Los Angeles managing partner at Morrison Foerster. You were also the co-chair of the firm's financial institutional practice group worldwide. So privileged and very grateful to have you here today. We're talking about preparing for partnership, but what I'd like to do before we start talking about the journey to get there, I'd like to think about the end goal, and I'd like to ask you what for you was the best thing about being a partner.
Sure. Well, first a clarification. I left MoFo many years ago, became general counsel at Stanford and then some other major companies. So I've seen from various perspectives, but I'm a strong believer in the partnership structure of law firms. By making partner, you now have a sense of ownership, assuming your firm is run in a way that's collaborative. But even more important, it's like getting tenure at a university. It says you've met a high standard. It tells the world you've met a high standard, so that if later you want to move laterally to another law firm, there's not a question, well, why didn't she make partner yet? And even if you're going in-house, it has a big impact for the CEO or others to say, oh, no, she was a partner at such and such a firm. And then likewise, if you go in-house and later want to return to a law firm, whether it's your former firm or another one, it's a much easier situation for that lateral hiring.
Thank you. You've spoken a little bit, you've given us some insights there into some of the positive aspects of being a partner. I wonder if there are any downsides, and if so, what are they?
Yeah, well, I don't want to be Debbie Downer here, particularly for all those who are looking to become partners somewhere, but those of you who are will understand it. First of all, at most firms, you have to put up capital, and seldom do you have the cash, so you start borrowing. And the borrowing commitment often has acceleration provisions. If the firm seems to be in trouble or other things, suddenly you've got $100,000, $300,000 debt that you weren't planning to pay. And if it's a variable interest rate, if rates go up, you've got a problem there as well. It becomes worse if you later leave the firm, not urging you to do that, but often the firms delay the return of capital 3, 5, some go as much as 10 years. If you're going to another law firm, they're going to want capital. So now suddenly you may have borrowings for 2 capital requirements. So you're getting into heavy debt and you hope it never comes due. You're also judged now in some different ways. By making partner, a lot of it turned on the hours you build, some client development, but as a partner, you suddenly have a lot more obligations to try to develop a book of business, to keep other people busy. You get judged in many ways on how many hours, not that you're just billing, but others. You get into trouble when you're starting to write down billings, and it becomes very frustrating. You're efficient, but you're seeing others who are very inefficient. But when you try to write down their hours, suddenly you have the management committee all over you. Well, you got to achieve 98% realization rates here if you can. We don't want you writing that down. So now you're in between your client, who's not going to be happy with hours that aren't justifiable, but you got a management committee that's not happy with it. You may have personal liability. Most firms are in different structures, but there are some landlords around the country and around the world that want personal liability of the partners. And those of you who stay out of debt are the most vulnerable because you may be the ones that the landlord goes after first. And then finally, you become very grumpy, particularly after a partnership meeting. You need to warn your family and friends. You may be pretty grumpy at the end of a partnership meeting. You loved a lot of it, but you got pretty frustrated at times as well. So I think it's a good thing to get, but you need to be prepared for some of those downsides too.
Thank you. And you said a couple of things there that I know we are going to be picking up on later on. So I know Tom is going to be talking a little bit about business development, and I'm sure Nikki's going to be talking about some of the financial aspects there. You've said in previous speeches and articles that firms should reduce the time to partnership. What do you mean by that, and why do you say it?
Well, I've met with probably 100 or more different law firms, sometimes the entire firm, sometimes management committees, also with a lot of general counsel. And I keep telling them, you all made partner after 5, 6 years. The genetic pool of the United States and around the world hasn't gotten worse. There's no reason you're delaying these very capable lawyers. Bob Raven, our former chair at Morrison Foerster, later became president of American Bar, used to say, we ought to make them partner after 3 years or so. We know if they're not going to make partner, we're not sure why are they still here. They're doing major work for our clients. He also would say, I want them to have a commitment to this firm. And I think that's true. And clients see it. They see a significant difference between those who are acting like employees and don't particularly care versus someone who really does seem to care. When I became general counsel at Stanford, many of you know, I moved all of our work to 3 major law firms, virtually all of our work. We reduced our in-house staff from 27 to 5. And we moved virtually all of our work to fixed pricing of 3 firms. And I told the firms, I want your on-track associates on our matters. So we had 2nd, 3rd, 4th year associates who were doing partner level work. I saw it. Our clients, our internal clients, Gerhard Casper, our president, Condi Rice, our provost, they loved working with these younger people. And in my meetings with law firms, I also would see a difference, particularly at the regional, super regional law firms based of all things in Jackson, Mississippi, Butler Snow, or Oklahoma City. These regional, super regional firms still had a culture where the associates were the future of the firm. At one firm, when I met with them, I met with the partners in the morning, but then they had me meet with the associates, and the chairman said to them, look, Mike's telling you what he thinks is the future of legal practice, and we agree. But it doesn't matter what we partners think. The future of the firm is you. And so we're going to leave the room and you talk with him. What I saw was an extraordinary group of capable 2nd, 3rd, 4th year associates for whom this was the future. And as a client, I would see that different attitude as well. So I think we really do know who's capable. It gives them a much greater sense of this is their firm, they're going to do it. Now, on the management side of a law firm, it's ideal because now you've got a variable compensation factor built into your overhead. instead of the entire fixed pricing of your associates. Sure, for your younger younger partners, you're going to probably give them a guaranteed minimum compensation, but they're going to realize some part of it, maybe an increasing part of it as they stay on at the firm, is going to be variable. And so now you've got a much better situation of managing that budget for the firm. And you also have the junior partners realizing, wow, it's not just turning in hours. We've got to make sure this firm is really functioning. It's viable. It's a place I want to spend my career. So by moving to bringing that time to partnership down, I think it changes the dynamic dramatically.
Thank you. I have one last question. When you become a partner, obviously you've spoken a little bit there about the responsibilities and the change in role. What do you think it means for the time that you spend on client matters, firm matters?
At old Mofo, and I think it's still the case there and at most firms, the partners put in more hours than associates. It's partly for a lot of reasons. Clients wanted our time. We could get things done more efficiently. If and when firms move back, remember, billable hours is just a stupid recent invention of the last 30 to 40 years. Everything when I started was at fixed pricing. And I think we're going to go back to that. And with the introduction of artificial intelligence, which I now use in my teaching advanced contracts at USC, it's going to become part of legal practice. And if firms don't move to fixed pricing, they're going to get destroyed. So yeah, client development becomes important. How you manage those clients, producing a very high quality product at increasingly less cost. See, virtually everything else that's done in the world, we look at improved quality while reducing cost. At law firms, we have the weird situation that you keep wanting to increase the cost to make more profits. And I think we're going to move away from that. But as a partner, you're going to find, particularly as we move to fixed pricing, the use of AI, you're going to now have some interesting new tasks in front of you.
Thank you. I haven't seen the chat, but I'm hoping that people are putting questions in the chat because my mind's firing with different things that I could be asking you, but I'm very conscious of time. But Michael, thank you very much for opening the discussion and hopefully providing some food for thought for everyone online. What I want to do now is I want to introduce Jennifer. Jennifer, as I've mentioned, is going to co-chair, but before I pass over the baton to Jennifer as chair, I want to ask you a few questions as well, if I may. So the first question I would like to see, and we've spoken a lot there around kind of the demands of the job, and I was wondering, what do you see as kind of the increasing demands on associates in order that they be considered ready for partnership?
So I think about it compared to, let's say, 25 years ago. 25 years ago, associates were hired whether as new associates or as laterals, and laterals were less frequent than they are today. And you'd say, what are people looking for when they think about promoting somebody to partner? What do I have to do? And the answer at that time, and I bet Michael will be nodding his head, is we want to see the potential to be a partner. We want to see the potential to develop business. Those standards, for the most part, at the largest firms have changed. And they're harder. They're stricter. And so it's no longer a question of potential. Now it's more about demonstrated behavior and success. So somebody who we think can develop clients or grow clients. Now it has to be, in most firms, they have already done that and demonstrated that. So that's one really big hurdle in terms of what the expectations are of senior associates, but it's also broader. The expectation for pro bono, or in the UK, ESG, CSR contributions, corporate social responsibility, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that notion of firm citizenship, which connotes leadership, is something that is expected. We're also, as I said, looking at people that have already grown and developed client relationships and have started managing those clients. So in contrast to Michael's concept of let's promote them at fifth year, you see that time period getting lengthened because firms are less willing to take on that risk. There's also this expectation of community involvement, whether it is being on boards or being active in different organizations. That's something that is part of the overall profile when we consider somebody for partnership. And then developing and building teams. And the leverage model is still alive and well in law. So while we're looking for people who can bill a lot of hours and work really hard, we also want to see that they can lead sophisticated matters. And part of that is overseeing large groups of people. And part of that and managing those sophisticated matters is also pricing, budgeting, overseeing those individual matters to a budget. So whether it is a fixed fee arrangement or it is still on an hourly basis, there are now estimates going in. And those are matters that we have to report on a regular basis to our larger clients. So for example, at my old firm, the chairman was really great at kind of giving an idea of how wacky the legal industry is and why it's changing and why it should change. And the comparison is, if you were to want to go fly from London to New York and you went up to the desk at an airport, or you called your 800 number and they said, "Oh, so you want to go to New York? Okay, we can get you there." And you said, "Well, how much does it cost?" "Well, we'll let you know when we get there. It depends on wind and temperature, and so we don't know how much fuel we're going to use. So we'll let you know once we get there." That's not acceptable in the aviation industry, right? But somehow it has been acceptable in law. And so now, and you hear it from Michael as an example of a general counsel, we have had a couple decades of significant corporate clients saying, "We're not going to do that anymore. This is the amount we think this is worth," or "You tell us what it's worth and then stick to it. And it's up to you to figure out how to work your leverage model to make the numbers work for you. But this is what the matter's worth to us." So those are, I think, the biggest areas where we're really looking for a mix of talents as opposed to just a really smart lawyer that's good with clients.
I'm going to go a bit off piece with questions, so forgive me, because I always do. We're talking about lots of different skills that associates need when they make that step up to partner. How well do you think firms, how good are firms at nurturing that talent and actually starting to give the skills that the associates need when they get to that partner level?
Well, I think it varies. It varies based on the firm. And I'm actually looking at some of the attendees today, and there are people that I know from the professional development world that spend their time developing these programs. And that's something that I have done for many, many years. And I mean, I'll say two things. One is it is hard to teach without the experience of doing and without being able to take people out of the workplace for a few days and do really intensive training. So I joke about how I had somebody work for me who had been a customer service agent at Enterprise Rental Car. And she had a solid full 5 days of training before she ever talked to a customer. And that's just not something we typically do in law. Maybe we get them for 2-3 days, but to have 5 days or more of training an associate, especially a senior associate on the cusp of partnership, those programs are usually kind of 2.5-3 days if we get to do anything offsite. And so I think consequently, while the agendas look good and the topics are good and well intended, we tend to fall short in how we deliver those skills because we're not really taking the time to do a practice client meeting, have everybody divide up and go into those sessions with training on how to prepare for the meeting, an agenda for the meeting, do the mock meeting. We typically don't take that amount of time to do that with our future partners in the lead up to partnership.
I'm going to go back on piece now, but I hope we pick some of this up nearer the end. We've spoken a lot already actually about trends and differences. What are the trends that you are seeing, particularly with the kind of the generational trends that are coming through?
There are a lot of trends that are pretty consistent around work-life integration. I say integration rather than balance. I kind of think that's a myth. We are, as all law firms, I think, seeing this trend where from first years on up, there's a desire to kind of pay off law school debt, especially in the US where there's heavy debt, and go in-house or do something else. And we don't necessarily see the long-term investment. And I think it can be a really satisfying career, but the generational trend is it's not worth it. I don't want to have these emails coming in at 10, 11 o'clock at night. And there's a generation above where that's all we knew. So I think there's a rejection of this sense that everything's an emergency, that there's a 24/7 work culture. It's been exacerbated with COVID because with people working at home, they don't have that same separation where they could turn off their phone. Now they have to turn off their phone and their iPad and their computer, and the computer's right down the hallway. And so it's very hard to say, oh, well, I don't have access to my computer right now. So that's a big part of it. I think also we are seeing alternative tracks. Some firms are doing them more frequently than others. And that's another trend that is making it harder to become partner. And so for those that have been at firms 5 and 6 years and say, yeah, I've done this, I want to make partner. I'm a type A goal-oriented person. In some cases, it's gotten a longer track and it's also more competitive. And then there's this kind of additional fear that after 5 or 6 years, you'll be relegated to this alternative track. And we want to be careful that that's equitable as well from a DEI standpoint. But we also want to make sure that we're giving that option as a good option for people that like the work, but maybe don't want to develop the client relationships or that book of business. And so we want to make sure that we have some viable, respected options built into our business models. And so that's a trend that's kind of been a little bumpy because every time there's a downturn, firms think, oh, well, okay, that should be the first to go. But those can be very profitable for law firms as well and very valuable to clients because they're highly trained individuals if they're at the senior levels. So I think that's another trend. We see the up and down, and over time, there's getting to be more consistency in those alternative tracks as options for people.
Thank you. Again, my mind is racing with different questions, but we are going to stick to time. But please, if you are online and you have questions, do put those in the chat. We will be coming to those at the end. So I now hand over to Jennifer, who is going to pick up the baton of chair, and she will be asking some questions of Tom. So thank you very much, Jennifer.
Of course. Well, welcome, Tom. And coincidentally, there is a question in the chat.
I saw that.
So I'm gonna start with that, and then we'll talk about business development. But the question is, how can senior associates become better prepared to run a book of business and business development, and what can firms do to support that?
Well, what's great about that question is it really is a scene-setting question. You know, it really gets to the heart of it. And I guess if we start by looking at, well, what are the barriers? What are the things that hold senior associates back at the moment? I mean, the main thing I see when I work with law firms pretty much anywhere in the world is there are very few lawyers that get into the law in order to become salespeople. So they have this kind of misconception that business development is like this pushy act of selling, pretty much like if you were buying a used car. And of course, the reality is that they're the product, and therefore their authenticity is absolutely paramount. So one of the things that really gets in the way here is, I think, a lot of misconceptions about what business development is, and also kind of linked with that, the fact that the work that the lawyers do, their day job, that's where the buzz is. And also they get short-term results. You know, they've got a problem to address, they get a result, bang, they can move on. Business development isn't like that. You know, business development is about relationships, and relationships are complex things. But as soon as you recognize that people buy emotionally first and then they justify logically, then you can realize that actually, if I choose to, I can start focusing on the foundations of building the right relationships with the right people. And I guess it's less about what a firm can do to support you, because I think, Jennifer, what you just said about, giving programs on leadership or management, and they're not the same if you don't give people an opportunity to really do something, really hold a client meeting. So the reality is, if you want to get good at business development, you've got to go out and do it. And the more you do it, the more lucky you get. And the more lucky you get, the more business you win. But as an associate, senior associate, I think it's about having the confidence to practice at the edge of discomfort. It's the only way you've learned any skill of any value. You practice at the edge of discomfort, you learn that skill quickly. And for me, it's about picking 3 or 4 key priority foundations, so that even as a senior associate, where maybe I'm not interacting on a daily basis with the work givers, I'm working with members of an in-house team, I can still do very proactive things to build the foundations, such that as I move forward towards partnership, the people I'm working with in the client organizations are moving forward to being in a position to award work. So I think it's about choosing some foundations, but perhaps most of all, it's about recognizing that business development is an important part of the role. No one in that firm is going to say, right, now as a senior associate, you need to be spending 15.7% of your time doing it. You're going to have to carve that time out yourself from an already busy schedule.
Mm-hmm. And I love that phrase, practice at the edge of discomfort.
Yeah.
That's just,
I mean, you've never learned a skill of any value without doing that, and so all the books, and I write books, but all the reports, I'm looking at a recent report from Harvard, and it basically talks about the fact that people who are really good at this stuff, they've just focused on a few key fundamental actions. And I think at senior associate level, there are 3 or 4 things that you could do that, if you did them regularly, would absolutely build the foundation and move you forward. But they don't have immediate benefit. They don't have an immediate result.
All right. So three or 4 things. Let's hear what those 3 or 4.
Okay.
I have to ask.
So the first thing is, you've got to pick things that you don't need permission for, haven't you? You've got to pick things that you are in control of. And I think top of the list there would be building out your internal and external network. Now, not in a way that you might think of, because people who think of business development as a pushy act of selling possibly think that networking is about getting your cards out, getting coffee meetings, turning those things into instructions. And they'll always be disappointed, because networking and building out your network should be based on an act of giving, not an act of pushing. So every highly effective work winner in a law firm that I've ever interviewed holds reciprocity at the heart of their success, which is this idea that if I meet you at a networking event, all I want to do is find out, how can I add something of value to you? All of the best work winners are habitually looking at, who could I introduce Jennifer to in my network? Who might it be helpful for her to know that I've already got in my network? And what happens is, over time, if you do that, you get very much a differentiation from this pool of people who are seen as experts. And being just an expert is a really dangerous place to be. And what you're seen as, if you approach networking in the right way, is you're seen as somebody who's adding value. And that means people will talk to you, even if they know you don't have an answer, because they'll know that you're connected. So the first priority for senior associates now, and I saw Michael nodding, because a lot of partners that I teach this to come up to me and say, I wish I'd known this when I was an senior associate, is build out your internal network, cross practice, cross geography, find colleagues with whom you can collaborate. It's no chance that a firm like Baker and McKenzie have an approach where every year partners have got to submit an email talking about how many partners in different lines of service they've collaborated with. And they've seen their North American revenues increase by 40% in the last few years, partly as a result of an increased focus on collaboration. Only do that if you know your colleagues. So build out your network internally and externally. Build your profile. That's the second thing. Get on LinkedIn, have an opinion, have a profile that shows you as a human being rather than as a law firm robot. It's not just about reposting stuff that the firm tells you to repost. Yes, by all means do that. Have an opinion about it. Have a profile that you're building in an area that you really want to grow in. So Build your network, build your profile, track the winners. By track the winners, what I mean is you're dealing with too many clients to spend the same amount of time with everyone. But you'll know which of those clients that you're working with within organizations are the ones that are moving, the ones that are going places. And if you can just be a little bit more proactive with them, the reality is most partners that I speak to, if I ask them to track back their best client relationships, it's nearly always to a start point before they were a partner and before the client was in a position to award work. So the relationships you've got now probably are hold within them some of the best client relationships you've got going forward when you become partner. So those would be three things I'd focus on. And a quick answer to just Sean, because I've seen the question in the chat box. Do you think remuneration structures need to reflect collaborative efforts? I think they do, but I've never met a law firm yet where that remuneration structure absolutely matches that requirement. And yet within every law firm, you have people that do have the focus and discipline. If they don't have the innate motivation to do this stuff, they have the focus and discipline to do things almost despite the remuneration structure, and they win out.
Thank you so much. I think that concept of lifting all boats through collaboration, that everyone does better, and your Baker McKenzie example is a good one on that respect. So thank you so much, Tom, for your thoughts. Really helpful. Going to turn to Nikki Owen. Nikki, and I know we have you on audio. I'm sorry, we won't be able to see you as well. Moving into a partnership role requires a higher degree of financial competence, and you've written quite a bit about this. I thought it was really helpful. Can you give a summary of what does a future or soon-to-be partner need to know from a financial standpoint?
Yes, Jennifer. I really think you've got to change your mindset, because you are going to be investing into a business. What do you want to know? Yes, it might be investing into a business that you're going to be working within, but you need to think about what is the risk and what is the reward. What funds will you receive, and when? Will you be a fixed share partner, and what is the drawings profile? Because let's face it, before, when you're an employee, you know what your salary is going to be each month, but what are your drawings going to be? Are they going to be a monthly draw? And what about other payments? And what about tax? So it's a start of it's a dawn of something new and exciting, becoming a partner. You've also got to think about what is the objectives that the firm is going to expect from you. So are you going to be a work generator? Are you going to be a work doer? Perhaps you're going to be a technical expert, a business manager, a growth generator, perhaps a client handler or a leader, or perhaps a combination of all of those or some of those. And then also you've got to find out about how will the profits be split. Now, we heard from Tom about he's never seen collaborative efforts being rewarded. Well, I do know in accountancy firms, they do get rewarded. I know at Crowe they do, but it's all part of your performance. So you need to find out how your profit's going to be split, because you need to work out what you need to do to increase your profits. Is it going to be based on a return of capital? Is it going to be a profit share and it's equal between all partners? Is it a lockstep? So the longer you've been at the firm, the more points you get. Is it going to be a point system based purely on performance, or is it a combination of performance and your appraisal at the end of the year? Is there a base profit share, and then if you've got a management role, you get a bit more? And what about high achievers, particularly the real rainmakers key in the firm? How do they get remunerated? So there's all those things to take into account. So I think on that particular question, my takeaway is what will your profit share be based on? Because you need to know that to be able to make sure that your objectives are geared to that point.
And is this the kind of issue where you advise senior associates before they're even up for partner to consult with a financial advisor or accountant? At what time is it the right time to kind of go prepare for this kind of change in career?
Oh, I really think you should you should think about it as soon as you want it, because you will see. I've seen it in my own practice where we've had a trainee come in and you thought, wow, that's partner material, and they might only be 22, 23, but you just feel that they're raw, and you know that they will develop and they could be a really good partner. And then other people grow into it. And for some people, it's not on their radar because they want to go through the stages of their and rise through the firm at a much slower pace and at the rate that they want to be. So I do think you should be talking about it as soon as you think that you want to be a partner, or even ask early doors to find out, well, what is actually involved.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the financial structures of law firms overall, in terms of how significant the overhead is, how significant the cost of employees that are not timekeepers, not attorneys or paralegals. One of the things that I've noticed is with associates, they will often look at how much money they're taking in on their billable time and say, the firm is making so much money off me. What would you say to those associates to understand kind of the full financial breadth and cost of a large law firm?
I think you just have to think. You have to think of the big picture, and when you become a partner, it's a lot more, because I think partners are guardians of the firm. It's a bit like what Michael was saying earlier, and it's key that during their stewardship, the firm grows and develops. And with that responsibility, there is a need to have you'll need to understand the financial management, and you'll need to understand the financial information and how the firm is developing and what are the expenses, what is the turnover. So I think it's more than just an individual doing their job. Becoming a partner, there's a shed load more that comes with it. There's all the worry that actually you've got all these livelihoods at stake. And I think we all saw that during COVID, because one moment we were all in the office and the next moment we're all thinking we're all stuck at home now and we have to make this work somehow, because if we don't, the firm could collapse, and all those livelihoods, all those people that I work with, their livelihoods, their family lives could be destroyed just because we, as a group of collective partners, didn't pull together and make the firm work.
Mm-hmm. And finally, in terms of becoming a partner, what are some of the tax concerns just generally that an up-and-coming associate should be thinking about as they prepare for partnership? What are the tax consequences of becoming a partner that are different from being an associate?
When you become a partner, you have to think about, you're responsible for your tax. When you're an employee, you don't have to think about tax. It all gets paid for you by the firm. So when you're a partner, who's going to pay the tax? Quite often in the UK firms will reserve for the tax and pay it on your behalf. Whereas if you're a partner in a US law firm, that isn't usually the case. And you want to understand how and when you will be taxed. And in the UK, it's all based on the fiscal year. And we've got new rules coming in at the moment for this current tax year. You're going to be taxed on the year to the 5th of April. So if the firm's accounting year is anything other than the 31st of March, then you're going to be taxed on so many months worth of one profit share and so many months share of the following accounting year. So it's going to be quite complicated going forward. And the one question that I always get asked by partners is, I've got my accounting profit, but it differs from my taxable profit. And why is that? Well, there's a load of disallowables. These are expenses that aren't for business, or they're disallowed by statute. And in the UK, entertaining expenses are disallowed, so they get added back. Or it could be capital expenses or personal expenses that the firm has paid, because they might have paid for you to come into work, but actually that is private commuting. So there's all those expenses that get added back. And then also there's some timing differences along the way. Like we don't allow depreciation, but we do allow capital allowances. Any employee bonuses or pension contributions paid towards the end of the year. If they're not paid by the end of the year, then they're not always allowable. And then you need to register with the revenue. And you need to do tax returns, and you may not have done tax returns. And if it's a multi-jurisdictional firm, you could be filing tax returns in lots of different countries. And then in the UK, you pay tax twice, in January and July. And if you don't pay it on time or your tax return is late, there's interest and penalties. So it's really key that you're in tune and that you know what your responsibilities are as far as tax is concerned. So I always think the key point is to ask questions, keep on asking questions, because if you don't know the answer, I guarantee you there's probably another partner in the firm that either has forgotten or doesn't know. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Do deal with your affairs on a timely manner. I know it comes in the way of doing what you're good at, your chargeable work, but the firm needs to know what tax they need to pay out on your behalf, because that's all part of their cash flow. And if they don't know what the cash flow going out of the firm is, they can't plan, and you're holding that up. Because let's face it, if a firm is paying the tax on behalf of all of the partners, that's a lot of money going out on particular dates. So my takeaway there is to deal with your tax return on a timely basis, and don't leave it until the deadline. And if I was thinking about all the financial information that you get, if you're part of a US law firm, it's going to be a shed load more than what it is in the UK. And again, if you don't know, if you don't understand any of the documentation, ask, and ask.
Very good advice.
Like little children.
Yes.
When we were told, if you don't let first succeed, try again.
Right.
But yes, if you don't know, someone else, I'm sure, will know.
Great. Thank you, Nikki. That was enough to convince, I think, anybody to go get tax advice quickly. So thank you for that. I'm going to turn to Claire, my co-chair.
Thank you.
To talk about choice and gender, the topic of your chapter. First, let's talk about what made you select that topic.
So I guess the simple answer to that question is it's something that fascinates me, and I'm very conscious of the makeup of the panel, and I suspect that there will be people listening in from different parts of the world, and a lot of the statistics that I've looked at are kind of UK statistics, but I know I do work with She Breaks the Law, and I know that the stories that I hear in the UK are echoed outside of it. And I guess I started life as a trainee solicitor in the UK more than 20 years ago now, and when I left, I remember, there was a conversation about, what can we do to retain our female talent? How can we make sure that the female talent that we have makes it to partner? And if you look at the statistics that are out there, and they're all over the place, so I'm not going to point to any particular one. but women are underrepresented at partner level at most firms. That's certainly true in the UK, and I know it's true in jurisdictions outside of the UK. And for me, it's something that fascinates me, frustrates me, and something that I've been quite vocal about, certainly in more recent years.
Yeah. I think many of us share that concern, so that makes certainly a lot of sense. So why do you think the statistics of most law firms are still not reflective of the population going through law school?
So I wanted to try and find out the answer to that question, and again, a simple answer to that would be it's systemic. But how did I come to that conclusion, and what do we do about it? So I started life at Herbert Smith firm in the UK, and I decided to track the intake that I started with, to try and find out where they had ended up and why they had ended up where they did. And I did a combination of qualitative research, quantitative research, and I also read a lot of the academic papers that are out there and available for everyone to read. And what I found was that whilst my intake, which started off more heavily female than male, whilst we ended up kind of 50-50 practicing law, and I think that's important because I know that some women sidestep and go into professional support roles, or maybe they step out of the law altogether. But from my intake, it was pretty even in terms of those that stayed in fee earning roles. And while 60% of the men in my intake made it to partner, and made it is a term that we could also have a conversation about, but anyway, 60% made it to partner versus 23% of the women. So pretty shocking. And I started off by myth busting and lots of things that we often hear. So it's about access to work. It's because they go off and have kids. That's one that I've heard time and time again. It's because of a lack of role models. All of those things, there were reasons why I didn't identify those as being the reason why women didn't make it. What did have an impact, one, the 24/7 culture, that's already come out a little bit in the conversations that we've been having today. And there's a link there to me to this idea of greedy jobs, and the recent Nobel Prize winner writes about greedy jobs and talks about greedy jobs and the impact that has in particular on women. The other thing that I found, which was particularly interesting, was what we identify when we talk about this idea of partner. So I invited the people who I surveyed to identify traits that they saw in themselves, but also traits that they identified in partners. And both men and women, and partners and non-partners, had a very similar view of the traits that they thought were necessary to be a partner. And they included things like ambition, assertive, competitive, focused, strong. And they are all words that are gendered, and they're words that can cause a real double, particularly this ambitious, assertive can be a real double bind for women. So it's a big topic, and 10 minutes is a very short time to cover it, but big picture, that was what I found had an impact. And for me, a lot of that then ties into this idea of choice, and the choice that we make. There will be people online who are thinking, gosh, there's an awful lot to take in here. Do I want to make that step forward? And it's a big question, and there are lots of things that people need to think about. But in addition to that, I think the narrative that we tell ourselves, I work as a coach, the narrative that I hear female leaders tell themselves has a big impact as to whether or not we choose to step forward.
The narrative. So that's interesting. How can we help them change that narrative, or how can we, as either leaders or talent professionals or law firm managing partners, how can we help them change that narrative? If it's systemic, it's got to be more than just they pull them up by their bootstraps, right?
Absolutely. And because it's systemic, this needs to be tackled at different layers. I think at a systemic level, we need to understand where are the points in the system where we can have a big impact. On an individual level, I would say it's really important when we are, you know, as an individual thinking about stepping up, that we really unpick the choice that we are making. I think it is really important, and I think it's incumbent on the leaders in the firm to really question the choices that people are making. I think it is really difficult when you are on the track to voice any kind of concern about, well, actually, maybe this isn't for me. And by way of example, so a big part of my day job is business development, and therefore relationships are something I'm nodding along to Tom. A lot of what things come back to are relationships, and I look at relationships both externally but also internally. And I have heard from a number of senior legal leaders who have said to me that the reason we didn't go for partnership was because we are no good at business development. Now, that for me is really frustrating because it points to a lack of understanding of what business development is, which is what Tom discussed. And it points to a lack probably of role models of, you know, we look at the traditional rainmakers, and I think that there are characteristics of the traditional rainmaker that work with certain clients, but actually those characteristics don't work with other clients. And I think that conversation is one that doesn't happen out in the open. So I think what we can do is we can start to have discussions where we start to think about what are some of the things that we perhaps don't want to share openly, but by sharing things, so business development is a really good example, by talking to people about what does it mean to win a client. Actually, it's not an individual endeavor. I know there are lots of firms that reward it as if it were an individual endeavor, but it is a collective endeavor. And actually, particularly with complex big corporate clients, there's a whole network of relationships, and there needs to be that collaboration, which again Tom spoke about. And I think that for certain individuals makes them feel much more comfortable about stepping into doing that.
It's a great point. And I do also want to point out, especially for people in the US, that the ABA Commission on Women in the Profession just came out with a new study. I think it's like a 170-page report, but it's called Legal Careers of Parents and Child Caregivers, Results and Best Practices from a National Study of the Legal Profession. And they had a survey of 8,000 lawyers, and they had numerous focus groups as well. So I think, Claire, to your point about the impact of parenting and child rearing, that study is worth a read on what we as a profession can do differently. Thank you for your points on that and your chapter. And I'm going to actually turn it back to you to see if we have any questions to go over as we close out our discussion.
Thank you. I mean, we've had such a fascinating conversation and has covered so much ground in what is quite a short space of time. Alex, you've been looking at the chat. I've kind of had half an eye on it. I'm not sure that we have had too many questions that haven't yet been answered, but
no, everyone, all of the speakers were on those questions immediately. So thanks for that. Yeah, I think everyone's questions have been answered, unless anyone else wants to add one now.
Perfect. Well, let's invite. Is there anyone on the chat that has a question? Otherwise, if perhaps one of my fellow panelists has a question for another fellow panelist, something's piqued your interest and you'd like to find out more.
I actually have a question for Michael.
Fantastic.
So alternative fee arrangements have been around now as there's been this resurgence, and everybody's been saying how that's going to be taking over. And still, I think we're still at under a third of work being done on those alternative fee arrangements. What is holding either law firms or clients back? Because I still hear of stories where we are pitching to our clients, hey, we can do this on a fixed fee, and they're saying no. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. As you may know, after I chaired the Associate Corporate Counsel, I headed our Value Challenge project for 10 years. And we only half jokingly said half the problem is us, the in-house lawyers, who were afraid of going to fixed pricing. I will tell you that as we go to artificial intelligence, you're going to have to go to fixed pricing, or you're going to be in terribly difficult trouble. And Jennifer, I understood your points about leverage. Leverage will destroy you. You need to undo leverage. You need to, and we haven't talked about realization rates. When the firm, when I was managing partner at MoFo LA, we were around 95, 96%. When I meet with law firms in the last decade, they were in the 80%. Some were plunging into the 70%. Any of you who are not yet partners, I would suggest you need to ask, what's the realization rate at this firm and what are we doing to improve it? When the firm gets to fixed pricing and the use of artificial intelligence, it should have realization rates above 100%, well above it. And now that's going to put a lot of incentive on the firms to do it. At MoFo, most people don't know it, our then chairman made a decision to try to move the entire firm back to fixed pricing. And we were far along. And you will find one way is to just kind of make an offer to a client that they can't refuse. We propose doing this for the fixed price, and you're going to find it's much safer for your futures, particularly entire portfolios. And you need to find a client that's ready to turn over their entire HR portfolio, their entire, actually, some firms are doing all of the bank regulatory work is now being moved to fixed pricing.
Thank you, Michael. Again, half an eye on the chat, and I've also got half an eye on the time. So I'm going to take the liberty of asking the last question, and I'm going to ask the same question to each of my fellow panelists. And that is, what is your one key takeaway for people on the line, for those who are listening, who want to, thinking about the journey to partnership? What's your one key takeaway? And let's start with Michael, as we've just finished with you, but let's start with you. What's your one key takeaway?
Well, I think it's thinking how you present yourself as a junior or senior associate. And we urged this a lot at MoFo, and I urged it a lot as a general counsel. Your peers are the future general counsels. So become close to them. You're in the trenches together. They've got their problems in-house, and you've got your problems at your firm. Do great work for them, and over time, you're a partner, they're the general counsel. And the other is to treat your internal lawyers, both the partners and associates in-house, as your clients. Use all the skills you might know for external relationships on how you interact with your fellow lawyers internally as clients.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more with that. So thank you for that. Jennifer, we'll go to you next. What's your one key takeaway for people on the line?
I have so many. I think it's what Tom said combined with what Michael said, which is be relentless about doing things to help other people. Stay in touch with people. To Michael's point, when they leave, when your fellow associate goes in-house, stay in touch with them, not because you're going to get business from them, but because they're a good colleague, you can learn from each other. It'll be helpful to understand the general counsel experience. You can always do them favors. I mean, that is how you enhance your network. And that's a sign of leadership as well.
Thank you. I'm going to bring Nikki in next, because otherwise, not having her face on the screen, I'm going to end up forgetting her. So Nikki, what's your one key takeaway?
Be brave, be bold, and be yourself.
Brilliant. Thank you. Tom, over to you.
I'm struggling to find words that are more eloquent and articulate than Michael's for what I wanted to say, because that is essentially what I would fundamentally agree with. But I guess to add something, I would say, in the absence of motivation for the business development aspect of your role, all you need is focus and discipline, and only you can give those to yourself. So you've got to have the focus and discipline to turn up and do it. And if it was a kind of behavior that I would have you do for those colleagues, those peers, get used to asking questions you don't know the answer to. If we feel we're an expert and we link our value to everybody we talk to with our expertise, we're only ever going to ask questions we kind of know the answer to. The rainmakers, who we don't necessarily all want to be like, we don't want to turn everybody into rainmakers, because they're often not great long-term client handlers. If you want to be great lawyer but be better at business development, ask more questions you don't know the answer to.
Thank you. And oh, yeah, I would echo all of that. And I would also say be kind to yourself, because I think it's a long journey to get there, and also when you are there. So be kind to yourself, and make sure you listen to the narratives that are worth listening to, and question those that aren't. The other thing I would say, and I'm sure Alex would say this, is to get a copy of the book, because there are loads of great tips in there. And I am going to try and share my screen now so that you can all see, and we will share this with participants as well. So hopefully I'm sharing the right thing. There is a discount for everyone online who has stayed with us today and listened to us today. And as I said, we will be circulating that to all of you as well. So you know, take advantage of the discount and get a copy of the book. Get your firm to get a copy of the book for you, to hear more from all of us in a different format, and to give you lots of things to think about. So with that, we are on time. Thank you so much to Michael, to Tom, to Nikki, to Jennifer. Thank you again to Alex for making this possible and for bringing us all together. And thank you to everyone for listening and being part of the session today.
Thank you, Claire.
Thanks, Claire.